In this video, I'm going to walk through how I use Affinity to design a hero section of a website and design some custom vector artwork, then import it into Figma and design the rest of the layout in there. I know there's ways to do this in Figma with plugins, and there's libraries out there where you can grab custom SVGs, so Affinity isn't necessary for this, but I'm trying to learn Affinity more since I'm new to the tool and have only been using it for less than a year. And I also wanted to make this video in case there's other people out there that are using Affinity and trying to combine it with their web design workflow. So let's jump in and see how I did it. So I started off with gathering some inspiration and creating this mood board. And I wanted to grab different types of artwork, not just web design layouts, because I really like the aesthetics that some of these poster designs had. So I wanted to draw inspiration from that. I was really liking the way they used black and white and noisy textures and these different icons and small illustrations seen throughout the layouts here. I also really liked these abstract patterns that were used in some of these posters and wanted to see if I could pull some inspiration from that. I really liked the blurred text and these noisy backgrounds. I really like these simple web layouts, so I wanted to push the boundaries a little bit of how I would lay out a hero to make it feel similar to some of these poster designs. Since I knew I was going to be leaning a little heavier into vector art, I decided to start this with Affinity, and I only wanted to use Affinity to create vector icons and kind of lay out this hero section and use that as my starter before jumping into Figma. So I can get a little more creative in Affinity by using some of the tools that are built in, like using these warp mesh tools that aren't available in Figma. So I started here with my design and started creating some of that abstract art to show on the hero section of the website. I did set up some columns and rows in Affinity so that I could translate this over to Figma a lot easier. I created some illustrations here to show at the bottom of the hero. I used some of the built-in tools in Affinity to create some of these vectors, and I know that it's easy to grab some of these vectors online, but I just wanted to create them myself because I know I can do them pretty quick in Affinity, and I really want to get more practice in this tool. So that's why I designed these icons myself using some of the built-in tools in Affinity. So for these stars here, I use the square star tool, and this allows you to just create a simple star shape, but you have control over the amount of sides that you want to have, and you also have control over how large the cutout is within the star. So that's what I use to create the stars that are shown here. There's also a tool built in to create some of these arrows. So if you select the arrow tool, you can just draw out your arrow and you have control over what you want the pointers to look like. If you want to do a stroke or a filled arrow, there's a lot of control here and there's a lot of options you can adjust to make it fit your own style. Once I had my illustrations created, I went on to adding some other elements to the design. I knew I wanted to include large type and I wanted it to have a bit of that blur effect in it. So I had these two different words here with two different blur levels because I wanted to create a little bit of depth in this hero also. So that's why I put one a little more blurred than the other and one behind the illustration and one in front of the illustration. Since this is a website, the navigation was important here. So I didn't want it to just be black and white. I wanted to put a little bit of color in there. So I added these squares here so that it draws the eye to it. I didn't want this to be very hidden. I want it to be easy to use since it is a website. I also added a block of copy so users know what the site is about, but also give the site a little bit of visual interest here in the hero area. I also added this background image just to give it a little more texture so that it stood out a little bit more and didn't feel so flat. This is as far as I wanted to take it in Affinity since I was going to do the rest of the layout in Figma. But if I have to go back to this file to create any more icons or little small illustrations or details that I can't do in Figma, I have this file to go back to and work in. Bringing what I did into Figma was pretty simple since I recreated a similar row and column grid that I had in Affinity, so I was able to use this as a reference for other sections on my site also. Moving vector art from Affinity to Figma is pretty simple with SVGs, so it's no problem getting that in here and making it fit correctly. And recreating the same effects that I had put in Affinity are pretty simple to do in Figma also. I created the rest of the layout here in Figma and just pulled the content for the site and started laying it out. And I really wanted to follow a lot of that aesthetic that I saw in the other posters and other sites. So I was really trying to keep things simple, but I wanted a lot of those small details and icons and illustrations to add a little character to the design. I wanted to keep the sections clean, so there's no texture behind them, but the texture is reintroduced in the footer just to make it feel like the end of the site, and also to just tie back into the hero at the top of the page. I also added some more vector illustrations in here, but I did create these in Figma since they were pretty simple to create, like these arrows here on this button and these triangles. So looking at how this looks in the context of the complete layout, I was pretty happy with how this looks when viewing in the prototype mode. So this gives me a good idea of the direction I want to take the rest of the site in. I did want to start experimenting with this hero on an actual website and to get a feel for it in a browser, because I had some ideas on how I wanted to add motion to it. So to build this out, I put it in Squarespace, but because that Figma file, this could be built on any platform. It doesn't have to be Squarespace. I just put it on Squarespace because it's pretty quick for me to get stuff on there and start getting a feel for the design in the browser. I imported all my SVGs into code blocks. So if you just cut and paste the code from the SVG, which you can export from Figma, just paste it in a code block and you can drag it into your design. So I did that for this main abstract piece in the middle and for all the other illustrations that I had created in Affinity. I did add an image effect on top of the background image that I pulled in, and it's just this noise generator, this film grain. So I wanted to add that just to give it a little more depth so that it draws a little more attention to it when you first land on the site. I also started experimenting with some of the mobile views. I wanted to see how this could break down to mobile. So I did have to do a little bit of custom CSS to get this to line up in mobile the way I wanted it to. I also added some CSS to create a little bit of a parallax effects when you scroll so that the two words at the top and that abstract design move at different speeds. So it makes the depth of everything feel a little bit stronger. This will give you an idea of how much CSS I had to write to make this work in Squarespace. I had to write some media queries so that I could adjust the sizes of the fonts when the layout scaled. And I also needed to write some custom CSS to create those bullets in the navigation. And I also had to write some CSS for the scroll animations. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this looks and feels in the browser. So this is just one way you could use Affinity in a web design workflow. And I know for some it may seem like it's overkill, since there are plugins that could probably do this, and there are SVGs available online that you could download. But I wanted to create them myself and use a different tool to unlock that extra creativity that I could use in my web design workflow. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.